It's my pleasure to welcome the Honourable Greg Hunt, Minister for Health and Aged Care, to officially open tonight's event. We'll then come back to an acknowledgement of country and housekeeping.
Great. And thanks very much to Alex, to Nicola and Celia, Joanne and Lindsay, to Professor Joe Robinson, to Professor Pat McGorry, and to everybody who's here. When you think of what we're focused on today, it has to be boiled down to individual lives. And if this process of ethical design and suicide prevention saves one life or contributes to one improved life, then that will be enough. That will be enough. But I suspect, Joe, it will contribute vastly more than that. And Pat's played an immensely important role, as have you, Joe, during the course of the last year. And when we faced COVID and the lockdowns, there were many predictions that we would have a catastrophic human outcome. And there's good and bad news. The good news is that as I stand here on the latest advice, we've had no increase in the number of lives lost in Australia through COVID. And that's an extraordinary achievement, and all the things you argue for, so many others, the advent of over $500 million of investment directly in mental health during COVID and suicide prevention, including the access to telehealth, which will be an abiding feature of all the guns, literally help save lives and protect lives. The bad news is there's been no corresponding decrease in lives lost to suicide. So we are most likely on a trajectory for 2020, once all of the analysis has been done, that we will be roughly commensurate with what was the case previously. So those 3,000 lives lost in previous years are likely to be repeated. So a tremendous pain has been avoided, but a tremendous pain has yet to be mitigated. I think that's an honest appraisal and assessment of where we're at. It shows us what we can do, but it reminds us of what we have to do. And that's I think a very heavy weight in many ways, because progress, reduced numbers in terms of lives lost per capita across Australia. But those are still 3,000 lives that they put the road toll into. It pales into significance by comparison with what we face. So that's the heaviness, and at the same time we see the lightness of that which has been avoided. And so our task is a very clear one, not a simple one, but a clear one. And we worked, many of us, Joe, together, thinking through the question of, was there an acceptable rate? And the answer is no. So we agreed that towards zero is the only acceptable rate. We don't want to overpromise, and we don't want to pretend that we will be at zero, given all of the human challenges in any 1 year or immediately, but that this notion of valuing each life is fundamental to what we're doing. And so there are many programs, and I don't want to sort of overemphasise that, but in the 2019 budget, the focus in particular was on youth mental health and suicide prevention. It was literally the centrepiece, arguably for perhaps the first time, it was literally the centrepiece of a national budget. But as we speak, Pat, your work with the Victorian Royal Commission, the Productivity Commission are coming together. I spent 2 hours with the Prime Minister and the Treasurer and a team of people last week, focusing on suicide prevention and youth mental health, but across all of the different strands of society, so not just youth. And so there is immense national engagement right now. So this will be something to respond to again in the federal budget. But your work here is about the role of the community, the role of the professionals. And once we've supported headspace, youth mental health, and suicide prevention, none of that means anything unless there are people on the ground doing what you're doing. And that's where the ethical design and suicide prevention becomes so important. It's lived experience, it's peer work, it's expert work, it's clinical leadership, all coming together to design programs that will speak to the people who are at the centre of it. It's about not only the process, ethical, but the structure of the concepts. Does it speak to Indigenous Australians? Does it speak to people of LGBTI background? Does it address the needs of individuals from multicultural and non-English speaking backgrounds? That's what ethical design is really about. Does it speak to people in the language that matters to them in a way which is likely to assist them? That's what the task is. No pressure. And so I am absolutely honoured to be able to join you this evening to officially declare open the ethical design in suicide prevention workshop this evening. I hadn't realised, Joe, that it was part of the Melbourne Design Week and workshops, which is what I would describe as novel genius, and all part of the creative approach. And it was a while ago, Pat, when this building was just a design concept. And I remember coming here, and you showed me where the tree would be, or the tree would remain, and everything else would be built around it. And this building is a product of, I would say, ethical design. But it's a building which is in fact a hub and community, and it came from people doing what you are now doing, conceiving and developing and creating ideas. So to Nicola and Celia, to Joanne, Lindsay, and to Professor Joe Robinson, I wish you all the best in your work. I thank you for what you're doing, and to remember always that the importance of this is that this work can literally help save lives and protect lives. Thank you very much.
Before we dive in, we'd like to let you know that the panel discussion is being live streamed across both Instagram and Zoom, and we have around 250 of our friends and international partners listening online. So a big welcome to our online audience. The panel discussion is also being recorded, and we'll upload this conversation to the #chatsafe YouTube account. I now pass over to our other MC for the evening, Vivian Gregor.
Howdy folks, thank you Alex for that. I'm Vivian, I'm a student of RMIT's Communications program and an affiliate of Orygen, which is over 365 days. I have a mad passion for mental health advocacy, so the opportunity to be your MC with Alex and to have you in attendance tonight is a fantastic opportunity. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we are meeting on today and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to their ancestral lands, which continue to be important to the First Nations people of today. We pay our respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us tonight, from Parkfield and online. We recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people are overrepresented in Australia's suicide death statistics in comparison to their non-Indigenous peers. So throughout this conversation tonight, I encourage all of us to hold the experiences of First Nation communities in our minds. Change and progress will only ever ensue on an individual level if we are able to work together. So we are very, very grateful to be sharing this conversation with each and every one of you tonight. I'll now come back to Alex.
There are a few general housekeeping matters to touch on before we get started. Firstly, the maps you got when you walked in clearly outline where each part of the #chatsafe exhibition is set up tonight. It also includes information about where you can find both gender-neutral and accessible bathrooms. Even though it's very unlikely, in an emergency, we ask that you please follow Orygen staff who will show you the nearest exit and direct you to the emergency meeting point. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge the sensitivity of the content we're about to be discussing today. We're here to talk about ethical design in the context of youth suicide prevention research. And so it goes without saying that this is a difficult topic for many people. We would encourage you to look after yourselves, and if at any point you want to step away from the conversation, please feel free to have a look around the exhibition or step outside. So we will then now move on to introducing our panelists. I would like to invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves and say a quick word about what they're bringing to the event. We'll start with Associate Professor Jo Robinson from Orygen.
Hi everybody, thanks Alex and Ben. I'm Jo Robinson. I lead the Suicide Prevention Research Group here at Orygen and the chatsafe project. And I'm really thrilled actually that we're here together having this conversation about how we can work properly in partnership with young people to design and develop suicide prevention approaches for them. So that's something that I'm super excited about, and having a careful and nuanced conversation, I think, about what the role of social media looks like in that. I'm also very excited that we've got people actually here in the building with us for the first time in a long time, and also lots of our friends and partners joining us online. So thank you.
Celia Delaney from Portable.
Hi, I'm Celia Delaney. I'm a design strategist from Portable. We're a design and technology company based in Collingwood. I'm here today to talk a little bit about co-design, having worked with Jo and the chatsafe team for over a year now. And I'm super excited to hear from some of the students that we worked with, or not students anymore, that we worked with, to hear about what their experience was like working on the most recent project.
Dr. Nicola St. John from RMIT.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicola. I'm a communication design lecturer and early career researcher from RMIT. So I'm really excited to talk about my experiences developing an ethical design subject as part of a studio course at RMIT. And really having a conversation around how we can really centralise self-care within online learning environments.
Joanne Amarisa from RMIT.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Joanne Amarisa. Super excited to be here and share about my experiences being part of Nicola's class, our studio class in ethical design, and to learn from everyone as well.
And Lindsay Unwin from RMIT.
Amazing. Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay. I was also a student under the care of Nicola. And honestly, right now, I'm just excited to talk about my experience with Joanne and working with Matilda as well, who is, I think, somewhere outside. We were working on this project called Safe Space. Hopefully you guys have seen it. It revolves around ethical design, co-design, designing with care. And I'm just here to share a little bit about my experience and hope you guys find it interesting.
So now for our first question from the panel. We're here tonight to talk about ethical design in suicide prevention and what better projects reflect on than hashtag chatsafe. So Jo, although everyone here already knows a little bit about chatsafe, can you tell us about how chatsafe came about and perhaps how ethical design principles were drawn upon in its development?
Sure. So chatsafe came about with funding from the federal government under the National Suicide Prevention Leadership Fund a few years ago. And I think really the philosophy behind chatsafe, I think, is we were seeing, unfortunately, suicide rates in young people go up. And that was despite the fantastic investment that we have seen from federal and state governments. And it really made us think that we needed to do something different in youth suicide prevention if we were going to start reversing that trend. And we felt very strongly that young people needed to be part of that process. Otherwise, what we were doing was just, perpetuating the fact that adults were designing solutions for young people that weren't really hitting the mark. So, and what young people were telling us was that social media also needed to be part of the solution. And I think for us that was a bit of an innovation or a bit of a paradigm shift, because up until then we've been terribly worried about the way young people use social media to talk about suicide, because we were concerned about the potential for distress and contagion and those sorts of things. But we also could see from and hear from what young people were telling us that there were all these potential benefits as well, which made it a really important environment for young people to have conversations about suicide and self-harm and other difficult topics as well. So what we set out to do, I think, was then partner with young people to look at, well, how can we make social media a safer environment to have conversations about suicide and self-harm, whilst not sort of shutting down an avenue of potential help seeking. So, for many young people, social media is the only way that they will seek help, or the only way they will communicate about a topic they find difficult to talk about offline. So we didn't want to shut those conversations down, but we did want to help them keep themselves safe. So I suppose that was the kind of philosophy behind chatsafe. And we then partnered with young people to develop the chatsafe guidelines, which were really designed to help those young people, I suppose, have safe conversations about suicide on social media platforms. And then what we did, because we know young people might not read guidelines, worked with young people from across the country to co-design a national social media campaign to then bring those guidelines to life in an environment that young people wanted to receive the information, if that makes sense. So I guess partnering with young people from the very outset and creating a solution for them that was driven by them, for us felt like the only ethical way to go about it. And to not have partnered with them, to us, would have felt unethical, even though it was a bit, out there, I suppose.
So co-design means a lot to me as a contributor to Orygen. I'm a lover of all things ethical. Comfort and safety are vital for young people to be able to have difficult conversations. The key to setting up safe and comfortable conversations in any community is cooperation, on social media and in person. So Jo has touched on what ethical design can look like in suicide prevention research, so it'd be great to hear from Nicola on this topic. Nicola, can you tell us what a subject on ethical design involves?
Thanks, Finn. Starting off, I'm very passionate about ethical design. Before coming to academia and education, most of my experiences in professional practice were based around working with non-profit organisations or social change organisations. And I always felt I really wanted my work to have an impact. So it's been a huge privilege to be able to take this passion and develop it into a subject area at RMIT. So the subject was designed really around two parts. The first part was really looking at, theories and methodologies around ethical design, drawing on careful design principles, things like design justice. But for me, I think it was really important that the students first, came to ethical design from an individual perspective. So we spent a lot of time focusing on things like people's biases, people's privilege, and understanding their own values and kind of really understanding themselves as people first before coming into design. And that way, they could see how they were kind of informing their design directions, and also how, when you come to a design brief where you've got to represent someone with a very different lived experience than your own, you can really approach it from this very careful, sensitive way, kind of knowing yourself first and kind of entering this kind of ethical space. So the second half of the subject was really focused on the two chatsafe briefs. And for me, this was really important for the students to be able to really practically apply the knowledge they were learning in our class around ethics. And the two chatsafe briefs that the students worked on, the first was around self-care. So this was a project where the students worked in small groups and they had to develop an online and social media campaign, really about normalising self-care. So this is really great in terms of really taking self-care away from that very overly commercialised space. So it wasn't about, spa days and face masks and expensive beauty products. The students really kind of had a lot of really great conversations around making self-care an accessible and everyday practice. And the second brief was around stories of hope and recovery. So this is really quite a tricky brief, and it dealt with real people's real lived experience of suicide. And the students were tasked with creating a really interactive digital online campaign to really represent and share these stories in a very kind of careful way, but also to try and encourage other young people to share their own experiences in ways that were safe and meaningful for them as well.
And what was your experience as a group seeing these experiences? Do you have any anecdotes for us in any particular moments with students?
I was really nervous coming into this studio. I remember having a lot of conversations with Jo just about the heavy nature of the subject matter. Why were we doing a subject about suicide in the middle of a global pandemic? So it was very nervous. We also had a lot of pushback from RMIT's own wellbeing team. They didn't really understand why we, as a group of design students, would actively choose to want to participate in a project around suicide, particularly in the middle of a lockdown in Melbourne. We were all working online, everyone was really isolated. So that was kind of, really tricky. But for me, I think working in partnership just made this project really possible. And I felt very supported by the team at chatsafe, which was fantastic.
Thanks, Nicola. I might quickly step back to Jo, because whilst it makes sense to involve young people with lived experience in the design process, suicide prevention research is a particularly sensitive topic. Jo, can you step us through how we can create safe spaces for participants in processes, particularly when focusing on sensitive topics such as suicide.
Yeah, and it is interesting hearing Nicola talk about her experience, and we all went into this a bit nervously, I think. When we first started the chatsafe work, we started it very slowly and very carefully. And, you know, as I said at the beginning, it did represent a bit of a paradigm shift, whereas the dominant narrative really had been to sort of let's stay away from talking about suicide on social media. And I thought then, am I the person standing up here in front of a room full of young people talking about suicide on social media? And, you know, it turned out I was. And I guess our philosophy was that young people were talking about this stuff online anyway. So for us not to get involved and support them and help them to do it was, for us, that was unethical and unsafe. But we did go about it very, very slowly and very carefully. So we are researchers, we work very carefully and closely with our ethics committees all the way along so that they knew and they were supportive of what we were doing. But we took a lot of very careful baby steps, I suppose, to keep young people safe and look after their well-being all the way through the work. So we worked with them before they came into any chatsafe workshops. We had wellness plans in place for everybody. So we had kind of emergency contacts. We'd done some work with them or encouraged them to do some work to look after their own mental health and well-being in the workshop, to think about who their supports might be if they needed to. We kept the workshops fairly small and contained, so they weren't too easy and overwhelming for young people. We did very careful sort of warm-ups and icebreakers with people so they felt comfortable to begin with. We took confidentiality and those sorts of things very, very seriously. We had breakout spaces and, you know, lots of snacks and fidget toys and things like that. Just sort of all sorts of things to really focus on people's young people's well-being. And we then did lots of kind of cool-down activities at the end to help them kind of shake off the subject matter. I suppose the other thing is that the workshops were always very well staffed. So we had our colleagues at Portable who were there really doing all the creative work. And then there was a big team of us from here at Orygen who were tasked with looking after young people's well-being all the way through. And we had clinical support and backup all along. So that was something that we took very, very seriously, actually. And the other thing to say that we did was evaluate everything we did. So we made sure that all the way along we were checking that the workshops, that young people were responding very well to the workshops and that they were feeling that they were safe. So that was something that we took a lot of care about. And we were very much led by the young people who were participants in our workshops. So if a young person told us they didn't feel good, we just pulled away from it straight away. So I think, you know, being led by young people, actually, they were very, very able to tell us when something didn't feel okay. And we were able, as I say, to kind of pull back a little bit. But it was something we gave a lot of care to. But I'm actually keen to hear what Jo and Lindsay think, because you were actually participants in some of the co-design workshops and in the ones that we were doing online, because it was during COVID.
Yeah, I think it was always established from the very beginning. Sorry, just to speak better. It was established from the very beginning that mental health was a priority and taking care of everyone and checking in on everyone. It was the little things, and even though this was an online learning environment, but being in Nicola's class, there was always, you know, okay, everyone, you know, we got a lunch break, we've got an hour, you know, take a walk outside, have a breath of fresh air. Those little things were actually really helpful, and I loved that aspect of I guess as a design student, and it was one of our last classes in our last semester before graduating, and I remember thinking like, oh, where's this been? Like I would have loved this mental health kind of emphasis on basically any class, you know, not just because of the content that we were creating with. So even though it was again in lockdown and like online learning, I think we went through that class in isolation, but I never really felt alone in tackling the projects and in learning about these really heavy stuff, you know, ethical design. You know, you speak a lot about privileges and biases, like Nicola said, but we've always felt really supported and really grounded. That's another thing that I remember, is that throughout the whole processes of us designing in that class, we were always sort of just, there was no kind of, oh, here's a brilliant idea and then we're gonna just like run with it and like do whatever we want with it. It was always just a really grounded process of, you know, okay, is this safe? Like, let's talk to Nicola, let's talk to each other. There was no idea left simmering in one person for too long and then you get really excited about it. It was always bounced off, always reflected. And so I think that was a really valuable learning as well. And we got that from Celia's workshop as well. Like that was where we developed ideas for our project Safe Space. And I think I would admit that in the journey of us developing that project, we also felt perhaps a healthy amount of weight in terms of like realizing the importance of the content that we were working with. And these were real stories. We didn't know any of the young people's identities, and I commend chatsafe greatly for that. Like they were really intentional and really clear about like, you know, keeping it secure, and like, you know, we didn't have any kind of details or identities or things like that. But I think just around realizing the importance of these stories to be shared, I think, you know, we took maybe around midway, we kind of like, oh, okay, this is getting real, and like, but through reading these stories actually, and because we were constantly supported, we actually, I don't know, like personally, I felt to care for these young people, and I felt kind of, okay, we need to protect this, and we need to protect this along with chatsafe. And so I think that's why the class was so successful, and that's why there's so many amazing work outside. It's because we created from a place of, okay, we're ready. We've got people, like we've got our peers supporting us, and we've got Nicola supporting us. And I know that chatsafe was also really involved in the process. And so I think that helped greatly in developing everything that you see now. But I might pass it on to Lindsay as well, because we took on the trickier brief of the stories of hope and recovery for young people. Did you want to talk about that as well?
Oh, yeah, sure. We did take the trickier brief, didn't we? Because as you guys know, Nicola kind of introduced it. We had a self-care brief, which you can see all over Instagram, and a lot of digital spaces. And then we had the stories of hope and recovery, which revolved around suicide. And it's been a couple of months, so just trying to get a little bit of a refresher. I think I vaguely remember telling Joanne and my other teammate Matilda that, you know what, I think it would be easier to create something that has never been done before with a brief this interesting, that, you know, because people, I think when people talk about suicide, there's always some sort of sad undertone to it, that it is something people avoid. We shouldn't talk about this. No, let's not talk about suicide. But with the chatsafe brief, they put in this idea of hope and recovery. And I thought, wow, this is such an interesting way of perceiving this topic. And I guess from a personal standpoint, I have like a little bit self-motivation trying to convince my group mates, is because I too am very passionate about mental health, and suicide is a topic that's very personal to me. And during the course of this class, under the care of Nicola and working with Portable and also Orygen and chatsafe, I just had this feeling of, you know, I wish I had something like this back then. And what a great opportunity we have now as young designers, as students, to be able to work on this project that could potentially help a lot of young people in the future. Because as Joanne and Nicola said, these stories are real, they are emotional. And, you know, what better way to sort of share these stories in a light where it could really bring hope to a lot of young people and hopefully encourage them to take on recovery. And I think that's just amazing. So yeah, that's why we took on the hard brief.
Yeah, but I think it was worth it then, because
Definitely, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I don't think, if I had to go back, I would pick that brief again and further develop it, make it even better than what it is now.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. You're also fabulous.
Thank you.
Fantastic speakers. For Nicola, what about your experiences here as an educator? Were the things you had to do to set up safe spaces in the classroom?
Yeah, there are a few things we did that I think were really kind of important to set up this safe space. So the first thing we did was really understand what our roles were in the classroom, which I think was really important. So we were working on a real brief. We had a real client, and I encouraged the students to think of themselves as working professionally on a real brief. And I was an educator, and we had our mental health experts and our co-design experts. So everyone kind of had their place, and it meant that there was never the expectation that we were ever going to talk about our own experiences or lived experiences in the classroom. We were coming at it, I guess, from a very kind of professional context, which I think really helped set the scene about coming into this work, working on a brief as a designer, and kind of working collaboratively with a partner. There were also lots of things that we did online, which were fab. I actually think the online environment worked quite well in creating safe spaces. So if students ever found the content quite heavy or they needed to take a break, it was really easy for them just to close their laptop screen or mute their microphone or send me a private chat message just saying, I need to step away, I need to take a quick break, I need to go for a walk outside, just need to make a cup of tea and then I can come back. So I think that really enables students to feel a lot more comfortable in this online learning environment. They never had to get up in front of everyone or in front of their peers and walk out of a room. So they could easily just step away very privately and just let me know very easily that they're okay and that they just need to take a break, which was totally fine. The other thing that I did, which I loved, was we created weekly self-care check-ins. So every week the students would be asked, what have you done this week to look after yourself? And they would respond with something visual or illustrated or a photograph of something they'd done that week to look after themselves. It might have been a photograph of, you know, a beautiful day that they'd gone for a walk, or a trip they'd done to the Queen Vic Market, or, you know, their favourite smoothie recipe. But I think these really personal moments during lockdown were fantastic in creating a bit of a online community between us all. I actually took part in these activities as well, which was great. So I love all these little personal snippets of getting little insights into students' lives, and it actually kept me really accountable to my own self-care, which is great. I also got my mum involved. So it was super cute getting my mum's homework every week and to make sure she was looking after herself during lockdown. And she would send me photos of her gardening and all her favourite books she was reading. And it was just lovely to be able to share that experience with the students. And we were kind of like, we were all in this lockdown together, and we were all sharing, you know, ways we were looking after ourselves and our own tips and tricks around self-care. That was lovely.
Thanks, Nicola. As someone who experienced remote learning last year, it's really nice to be able to hear about positive stories of connection, even though we can't see each other physically. Celia, you play a really important and interesting role as a designer at Portable alongside #chatsafe and RMIT students. You probably have a slightly different perspective given that you're working in the industry at the moment. In the youth mental health space, we're increasingly acknowledging the importance of partnering with young people with lived experience in order to design solutions to the challenges that they face. How does this work in the design world? Is human-centered design something that's considered important in your line of work?
Yeah, it's super important. It's really the most important thing we do as our design process at Portable, and it's my own personal practice as well. I really believe that the design challenges that we face at the moment in the world are way too complex to be solved by just one discipline. And that's why we love to take a co-design approach with solving problems in that way. Yeah, our job really as designers, we don't need to know all of the answers as designers. It's not our job. Our job is to design things for the community that the community want and the community need. And they can't tell us that unless we give them the opportunity to be involved in the design process and be involved in the co-design process. So it's a super important part of the way that we do.
That's really interesting. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about how co-design differs from traditional design processes?
Yeah, so we get this question quite a lot, and we get people often saying, why can't I just do, you know, some really amazing desktop research and just sort of design from that kind of place of knowledge? Because I'm a designer and I've got designer's intuition, and it's true, we do have intuition as designers, and co-design is not about removing your intuition or removing your voice as a designer. It's just about shifting the way that you approach decision making. So to give you an example, there's a saying in healthcare, which you might have heard, it's nothing about me without me. And that originated in healthcare, and it's about how doctors shouldn't be making decisions for their patients without their patients being involved in, you know, making a decision with them, because it's their body. And so they want to be involved in what's going to happen to it and what decisions are made about it. And it's exactly the same concept when it comes to co-design. We shouldn't be designing for people, we should be designing with them. So it's really important that we have the community engaged in the whole process, helping us to make those decisions each step of the way when it comes to research, when it comes to understanding what the problem space actually looks like, what is the shape of that problem, and then again, what is the solution, what do we actually need in the community, what's going to really help us as individuals. So that's kind of how it differs to traditional design.
So Right, with that difference, what do you think end users gain from being involved in the design process?
Yeah, so Nicola touched upon it a little bit. I think it will completely depend on sort of what project you're doing and who those end users are. But I think broadly, we often worry a lot, and we've all come across this with this project, we worry a lot that getting people to think about their lived experience and use it to help us in research and really think about the things that have happened to them or their community, dealing with difficult subject matter like mental health, youth suicide prevention, things like that. We often worry that too triggering, it's going to be too difficult for people to be involved. But the reality is that it can actually be a really empowering experience for people. Often people really want to be a part of the solution. They want to be involved in deciding what the problem looks like and what their community need us to design with them. And often people aren't actually given that kind of space and agency to do that normally. So it's often quite a new experience for people that are coming in as a participant of co-design. To give you an example, we've been working recently on a project in Tonga and Vanuatu, Portugal. We've been working with young women to help design solutions to cyber safety problems that they're facing. And quite often women in those Pacific Island communities, they're not often given a lot of opportunity or space to talk about the things that are happening in their world as women. So actually when they were involved in this co-design project and they were finally being asked, you know, what does the online space look like for you? What challenges are you coming across? They responded amazingly well because it was the first time they'd been really given the opportunity to actually talk to somebody about what's happening. And they had loads of ideas of how to solve it as well. They were finally able to be agents of change in the community, and I think that was really empowering.
That's awesome. It's so interesting to hear your perspective, given that you're currently working in this space. So when we go back to the work that's happening at Orygen, what did you learn from #chatsafe about youth mental health and suicide prevention through the collaboration?
Well, I've learned so much from working with Jo for a really long time now, but I think something that always strikes me with Orygen projects is that the mental health space is really being led by young people. There's such an impressive awareness of mental health, the way that it affects us, the intersections between identity and mental health. It's really impressive, that kind of, yeah, the amount of awareness that they have and the ideas that they have for, you know, moving forward in the mental health conversation. So that always strikes me. Also, I loved working with Lindsay and Joanne and all of their student colleagues because they bring this amazing energy and creativity and sort of sense of optimism to things that can sometimes be really difficult to work through as a designer, especially when you're constantly working on projects that can be quite, you know, difficult. You can sometimes get a bit weighed down by them, but I feel like working with young people, they bring this real sense of optimism that is so infectious, and it means that I end up looking at my projects through that lens of optimism. And it really helps me to work with young people as much as I can. So yeah, that's good.
Thank you, Celia. It's all about opportunity, isn't it? It's all about opportunity. So, Jo, would be opportunity. It would be very interesting to hear your perspective as a researcher. We've heard from the designers, but why do you think it is important to partner with young people who have lived experience of suicide and mental ill health when developing research and interventions like that?
Yeah, so I think, partnering with young people, it's part of our DNA here at Orygen. It is what we do. All of our work is involved around youth partnerships, but actually it's not commonly done in suicide prevention. And I guess the reasons for that are probably around safety. We do worry a lot that, the subject can be challenging and difficult for people. So we do worry a lot about people's well-being. And actually that's the case throughout suicide research, actually, is that young people haven't typically been involved as partners in suicide prevention research. And I think a lot of the reason for that is safety. And so we've been doing a lot of work, even before chatsafe, we were doing a lot of work in our team around building a body of evidence to demonstrate partly that it was safe to involve young people as participants, not just as participants, but as partners in suicide prevention research. But not just that it was safe, that it was actually also beneficial. And we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. But, you know, for us with chatsafe, we were really working with young people to co-design a campaign with the view that the campaign would be have more traction with young people, more acceptable, and what have you, more effective with young people if young people were involved in developing it. So we kind of had that endpoint in mind. But actually what we learned along the way was the process was also extremely beneficial. And because we did evaluate it, what we learned was that young people who were part of the journey with us also gained skills in how to look after themselves and their friends when talking about suicide, how to talk about that topic more safely and carefully, both online and offline. So it's the whole journey's been really interesting. And I think, you know, you gain so much, as you know, Celia said before, you know, from working with young people in terms of they do bring a different energy and a different lens to everything. And so you know, as I said at the beginning, I think we could keep, as suicide prevention professionals, we could keep trying to design solutions for young people, whether that's in research or in policy or in services. But unless we're doing that in partnership with young people, they're not going to be effective. So I think for us that, you know, it's just really important to find safe and effective ways, or to continue to find safe and effective ways and partner with young people in all of the work that we do. And again, and I've said it before, I don't think we can keep hiding behind the fact that we worry it's not safe. I think we have a responsibility to keep those young people safe when they're working with us. And so again, we put a lot of effort and care into doing that. But I do think it's just unethical to proceed in suicide prevention without partnering with young people.
So, Joanne, how do you think other young people can include co-design or careful design principles within their own journeys?
That's a really good question. I think with the young designers or students, fellow students who are here or who might be tuning in online as well, reflecting on all that we've discussed just now, you might be thinking, oh, well, I don't work in a non-profit or I don't work in an NGO, like maybe it's just not my call to be an ethical designer. But, when the question arises of like, oh, do I have to work in a non-profit in order to be an ethical designer? The answer is no. And, the best place to start is where you are with what you can do now. And I think that it is in fact essential that we have designers who want to think and create ethically in areas where ethics and safety maybe hasn't yet been raised or acknowledged. So wherever you are and whatever type of work it is that you're doing, don't downplay it, but be encouraged and be empowered and with the fact that you're needed there. And so we need you to think and create ethically from where you are as well. And when you do encounter that weight, like we touched on previously, of like, dealing with important topics, I would say that, that's just a sign that you care, that you genuinely care about the work that you do, because it is important. So yeah, that might be.
Lovely. And Lindsay, do you have any advice?
Let me think about that. I think my advice would be a little bit more self-reflective in a way, because one of the things that really resonated with me throughout this whole studio and throughout this whole experience is being able to just ask a lot of questions and be really honest with communicating with yourself and to everyone you work with. Because I think as designers, we tend to hold so much artistic value into the things that we make and we design, almost like holding it and not wanting to let go, thinking, this is my baby and I think it's perfect. But with ethical design, co-designing, and just designing with care, I think there has to be a lot of communication that happens between yourself, asking who you are, what are your biases, what are your preferences in design, and then asking the other person who your design would be designed for, asking what do they need, how do they benefit from this, how can we make this design as beneficial for them instead. And I think a lot of young designers, and including myself, we fall under this trap of wanting to just design the way we want it and want it to look as pretty as possible. But in reality, I think when we're co-designing, I just love that idea of, okay, we're going to ask a lot of questions. We're going to communicate with everyone, even through this safe space project. We talked to our studio lead, Nicola. We were under the supervision of Celia from Portable, and we just had this beautiful community and beautiful line of open and honest communication. And I think every young designer now, or maybe any designer to be quite honest, just make sure that ask a lot of questions to yourself, to others, because once you ask the right questions, you get the right answers. And when you start to understand yourself as well, you build empathy. And I think that's what ethical design is, designing with care. It's just having empathy for the people you're designing for. And that would be my advice.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think that's really insightful. This has been a really great conversation, and there's probably so much more we could get into. But because we're reaching the end of the conversation now, let's wrap it up. It would be great to hear from each of you on one last thing. What do each of you see as a key take-home message for tonight, and what do you hope the audience walks away knowing or thinking about? Jo?
Well, I guess my key take-home message is that it is safe and ethical and extremely beneficial to partner up with young people and do co-design work in suicide prevention, and that there are really safe ways for young people to have conversations about suicide on social media platforms. And although we need to be careful about that, we should be less afraid of that.
Celia?
Can't really follow that.
I would say that if there's any designers or researchers listening, to just remember that it's super beneficial for the people that you're involving in your project if you take the co-design approach, but actually it's really beneficial for yourself, because the value that they bring by like sharing their lived experience with you actually just benefits your project massively. It makes it so much better. So don't be afraid to have a go with co-design. It's definitely going to improve whatever you are working on.
Nicola?
My key takeaways would be, don't be afraid to be a bit vulnerable as an educator, to really trust your students to have these really hard conversations in a classroom environment, because I think it really leads to kind of amazing, kind of impactful learning for everyone involved. And I think there are safe ways to do these projects alongside amazing collaborators.
Joanne?
I guess my message would be more for fellow designers and fellow young, design students who are here. First of all, take Nicola's class, highly recommend. But also, I think please start seeing the work you're doing as important, because it is, regardless of where that is, and embrace the fact that you're there not just as a designer to make pretty things, but you're there as a living, breathing person who's really young person who's aware of everything that's going on in the world and what causes need your attention. And so I think, just embrace that and feel empowered by that.
And Lindsay?
I don't think I could top any of that. Lucky last. I guess my advice would also be for young designers or just designers in general is not to be afraid to ask questions, and not just to others, but to yourself. Like I said before, really understanding who you are, who are you trying to design for, who is the most vulnerable in this project that you're designing for. Because the more you understand yourself, the more you'll be able to create designs that are beneficial for others. That would be my takeaway for today.
Thank you all so much. Unfortunately, there is no time for a live Q&A, but we would really love to keep this conversation going. There are two ways to keep this conversation going. One, please send any questions or thoughts you have through to chatsafe@orygen.org.au, and we'll get the panel members to get back to you. Two, join in on the online conversation by using the hashtags that are around. Hashtag chatsafe, XMDW, or just hashtag chatsafe. With that being said, a huge thank you to each of our panelists for lending your expertise and for sharing all of your contributions tonight. A huge thank you to all of our audience, both here in Parkville and to those streaming online across the globe. Finally, we would of course like to thank our funders, without whom none of our hashtag chatsafe work would be possible. This includes the Australian government, who have funded hashtag chatsafe under the National Suicide Prevention Leadership and Support Program. We would also like to thank Future Generations Global, Facebook, and William Buckland Foundation, and our project partners, Portugal, the University of Melbourne, Every Mind, and importantly, all of the young people who have contributed to the development of chatsafe.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Rockstars. You've all done marvelously, I think. For those of us in Parkville, refreshments and canapes will be available until the doors close at 7:30. Until then, we encourage you to wander around the chatsafe exhibition. A number of our team members are located around it wearing yellow lanyards. And if you have any questions about the research project, the design process, or anything related, please feel free to go and have a chat safe. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you had a marvelous evening and thank you for your attendance. It's been great.